Hi, this is our presentation on Teaching and Facilitation by Lisa Lelm and Heather Moon. Today our learning objectives are to distinguish between teaching and facilitation, identify frameworks that inform teaching and facilitation, explore power, privilege, and oppression models and ways to navigate facilitating and learning with these concepts at play, and to understand the relationship between student affairs professionals and their students' use of social media. Our chapter begins with a scenario about Brandon, a hall director who works at a predominantly white campus. He manages 5 or 6 white women and 1 black man who are resident assistants. He's been trying to process the traumatic events of police brutality against black men during the summer as his staff returns for a retreat. His main goals of the retreat are for his staff to 1, gain awareness of that privilege exists, and 2, to reflect on their intersected social identities. I think this opening anecdote is a really good reminder about all the things that student affairs professionals do. It showcases the importance of responding to students' needs while also balancing their own self-care and healing. I was pleasantly surprised to see that this book has a very progressive definition of teaching. Teaching should be a two-way street between teachers and students where they can exchange and share knowledge and lived experiences. This can be uncomfortable at first, but teachers can support students in challenging power imbalances to actively reflect on their lives and the world. The core principle of teaching should be that everyone contributes. Students do not learn best and are not engaged by simply sitting in a lecture hall and then regurgitating information. Students do learn best when teachers combine small stories and lived experiences with traditional ways of teaching in order to tie in the larger themes and ideas of what they are studying. Student affairs builds on the ideas of progressive teaching but has a less directive approach. Student affairs professionals lean more heavily on reflection, guided activities, asking important questions, and paying attention to the voices in the space. They engage students in conversations about privilege, power, and oppression, most often in places like women's centers, multicultural affairs centers, and LGBTQIA+ centers. They train staff members, manage group conflict, set expectations, and hold students accountable, and work to build community within their workspace. This happens more often in student activities, resident life, orientation, first-year programs, academic advising, and more. When being a facilitator in diversity affairs such as women's centers, multicultural affairs, or LGBTQ+ centers, it's important to note that you need to take a critical and dialogical approach. Critical means that you are attuned to the fact that some large systems can have inherent racism, classism, sexism, and heterosexism. These issues can be inherent in large systems such as laws, schools, policies, and the judicial system. Facilitators use a critical approach to pose questions and rely on the students' experiences in order to understand the student's role in maintaining or dismantling the systems of power. A dialogical approach is when a facilitator guides the process of students coming to know by sharing appropriate readings, reflection activities, and questions. The facilitator is a guide that helps students sort out their own understanding of complex issues and their place in them. The facilitator can acknowledge and hear the complex feelings such as guilt, anger, hopelessness, and shame that can come with this work. When facilitating in diversity affairs, it's important for the facilitator to be using both critical and dialogical approaches in understanding when each type is necessary and how to flex between them. Examples of facilitating in other student affairs settings are for resident life, like resident assistants, dining hall employees, campus activities and student organizations, and academic advising. Working in these student affairs areas requires different kinds of skills in facilitation. Using multi-partiality when working on disputes is important because it recognizes power differentials between parties in conflict, whereas neutrality does not. Multi-partiality means navigating numerous perspectives rather than showing a preference for one or the other. This can be often used to settle roommate disputes. Building community is a very important part of campus life and can be done by using peer facilitators in settings like residence halls, orientation, and first-year programs, or among staff members. This can build trust among students and in collaboration with other faculty. Student conduct always seems to be an issue in student affairs, and restorative justice can be a powerful and meaningful remedy. Restorative justice is the practice of facilitating a student's understanding of their violation, how it affects others beyond themselves, and helps develop ways for the student to take ownership in repairing the harm it has caused to the community. The Chickering-Gamison 7 principles are all intended to be applied by student affairs educators when working with students. Number 1 is student-faculty contact. Contact between students and faculty members is used as a way to improve student learning. Number 2 is cooperation among students. Developing reciprocity and connection among other students is important in building their community. Number 3 is active learning. Active learning is the opposite of sitting idly while listening to lectures, reciting facts, and spitting out answers. It's learning a skill by doing and practicing in a real-life situation. Students are better able to then actively reflect on and apply what they learned. Number 4 is prompt feedback. Prompt feedback can enable students to reflect on their behavior and learning in order to see what they knew, what they're missing, and how to see ideas differently. Number 5 is time on task. This allows time for students to both learn by doing the task and time to reflect on how it went, what they learned, and how they can move forward. Number 6 is high expectations. You can offer students adequate support to meet those high expectations in order for them to learn. Number 7 is respecting diverse talents. This principle encapsulates the role of teaching and facilitating in order to respond to diverse learners' needs.
We will also discuss the Learning Partnerships model by Marcia Baxter-Magolda. Some of you may remember or be familiar with the theory of self-authorship, which is about how individuals seek to take ownership of their experiences and lives in order to determine how they think about something based on their beliefs and values, rather than following formulas. I believe this is a good foundation as we move into describing Baxter-Magolda's Learning Partnerships model. Situating learning in the learner's experience, learning should be relevant to the students' lives and experiences. Educators can make content more accessible and engaging by linking new information to what students already know or have experienced. Validating the learner's capacity to know, students should be affirmed as knowledge creators. Educators could recognize and validate students' capacity to contribute meaningfully to discussions and knowledge building. And then lastly, mutually constructing meaning. Knowledge should be constructed collaboratively instead of in the traditional student dynamic where the teacher is the sole knowledge bearer. Both educators and students can work together to build this understanding. This is all important because it can improve the learning experience for students. It's a powerful way to acquire information and develop new skills. And it also has a direct application to the real world scenarios that take place, which it makes it especially important. This approach has the greatest potential to engage students and keep them motivated towards their goals. The next facilitation type discussed is called Communities of Practice Model by Lelm and Wenger. They say learning as situated is how people become full participants in a community by being in the community and acquiring knowledge and by just being around other community members. Newcomers can get involved in the community's social and cultural activities to learn the ropes, essentially. It's like an apprenticeship where beginners work with experts and then take on more and more challenging tasks as they gain experience. Legitimate peripheral participation is a way of learning by participating in the community, starting from the outsides or the periphery and then moving towards center. This is key here, this next one. Students feeling empowered to learn deeply when they're full members of the community, not when they're prevented from contributing. We can use these ideas to help different students in different communities, just the way Brandon did to help his RAs understand that taking more ownership over their learning and the community that they're within will help them feel more empowered. So asking them, what does community look like for them? And bringing that large scale down to a little bit smaller scale is an example within the text. Earlier, we discussed the critical dialogic work involved in facilitating intergroup discussions. Now let's delve into the frameworks related to power, privilege, and oppression. This will help us prepare for facilitating challenging discussions you may have with students in your work. The first model we will discuss is the four-stage intergroup dialogue model by Zuniga. The first part is to build trust. Simply start by forming trust by setting basic ground rules and doing low-risk activities so that people feel more comfortable right off the bat. The next stage would be to explore differences and commonalities. Simply connecting with people who have similar identities as you, or put them together. Talking to people who are like you about shared issues is a way to become more comfortable discussing them, which could help students bridge into talking with other people with other identities different than theirs. The next stage is exploring and dialoguing about hot topics. So really it's about understanding that these topics are important to society and being able to have conversations about oppression and privilege that could bring up certain emotions. And then the last one is dialogue to action. This is turning your talk into action. Facilitators can help students figure out how to make meaningful action based on their discussions to create the change in the world that they would like to see. The next one is about navigating triggering events by Aubert. Aubert provides a framework for addressing events that trigger intense emotional reactions, which can often serve as barriers to effective dialogue. It focuses on recognizing the triggering event first, and then understanding one's emotional response, analyzing the underlying causes, and then finding constructive ways to address and navigate the situation. This is important because as a facilitator, you may not know that you are triggered. With these triggers comes that initial stimulus that happens within the discussion. And then from there, it triggers a root memory for the facilitator. And then at that point, there's a story created. And that story is you're having an emotional response from the stimulus, which will cause some sort of emotion, and you create a story about it. Then the reaction to that stimulus is what happens as a result of those prior steps. And then the participants within the discussion, it might trigger a response in them. So this is very important to have the self-awareness to know when you are triggered as a facilitator. This has happened to me plenty of times as a participant, and this is something I really am working to be able to be aware of when it comes up. The next model is the Privileged Identity Exploration Model, PI for short, by Watt. This model revolves around how people react when they encounter information or experiences that challenge their privileged identities, typically like race, gender, or socioeconomic status. Reactions may range from defensiveness and denial to feelings of guilt. This PI model offers a structured approach to reflect on these reactions, understand their origins, and transition to more productive responses. There are 8 defense modes that can be put into 3 different categories. The first category is recognizing. This is where we gain awareness The second is contemplating, which is the chance or the opportunity to reflect on what privilege means. And then last is about addressing by taking action steps to do what is needed. Going through the different defense modes, denial is when individuals ignore recognizing new information. They may believe that everyone has equal opportunities, and disparity arises from an individual choice rather than a systemic issue. The second one is deflection. Instead of addressing the issue at hand, an individual might shift the focus into something else to make themselves feel comfortable. Rationalization is when people justify or give reasons for why certain disparities exist. Under contemplating is false envy. This is when an individual may express envy towards a marginalized group, suggesting they have certain advantages or desirable qualities. Principium is when you avoid topics altogether for religious reasons. And then lastly, intellectualization is when you make sense of your dominance and oppression in just really abstract ways. Under addressing, we have benevolence, which is displaying generosity to show an alliance to a certain group or a social justice issue. Rather, it could be counter to the goal, which would be to dismantle these systems. And then finally, minimization is just downplaying the impact or existence of privilege. Simply, it's oversimplifying.
This chapter closes with attention to social media because it has become a way for students to engage with issues happening in their campuses and society. The following 3 ways students see and use social media are important for student affairs professionals to pay attention to. The first one is social media and activism. Students use many different social media platforms for many different reasons. Some use it to become more involved with the issues that affect their communities, while others are participating in what is called slacktivism, which is only posting or reposting comments on social media without actually engaging in actions to make change in society. Professionals in student affairs should help students make sense of their social media activism and connect the activism to local issues on campus and in their communities, and resist the urge to label it as slacktivism. Critical consumers. Student affairs professionals should seek to become critical consumers and encourage their students to do the same. Social media also comes with some defensiveness and shame. Students may experience or witness posting something that someone else finds offensive. Then several users can heavily critique the original poster, which then leads to shame for those actions. If this book were published more recently, this would probably be called cancel culture. The facilitator needs to work with the student's feelings of shame in ways that invite the student to continue engaging rather than retreating. They can work to help students understand different defense modes, normalize them, and be able to comfortably speak about them. This can help build a student community instead of dividing it. There are a lot of impacts that this chapter has on student affairs today. I think the 3 most important are that student affairs professionals should lean into the teacher and facilitator roles. The more they can flex between those 2 areas, the more it helps with students' learning and engagement. The second is that student affairs has a big impact on student learning and life on and off campus. And I think for the most part, it's important for us to remember that as we are teaching and facilitating. And then last, student affairs professionals can serve as models and guides for how to use social media ethically, and they can help students sort through feelings of things that they see on social media as well, and their reactions and effects it has on them. So this is also, I think, really important in terms of having some therapy or counseling skills in order to be able to help students sort through the feelings that they experience when they're on social media. That's all for our presentation today. Thank you.
We'd like to thank you all very much for watching our presentation. We look forward to the discussion and hearing what you all think. Thanks.